Alright, there's been a few anime which are held up as some of the best in recent years, especially in fantasy. It's these three. Sometimes you even hear of them as like a white knight coming in to save a genre that's been wallowing in the formulaic weeds for a while. But they're all completely different. The thing that makes this new fantasy big three so special isn't fantasy, it's something else. They each start in fantasy at that root, but they take a core aspect of the genre and go somewhere completely different. Their biggest strength, all three, well, it's obviously cute girls making silly faces, the cornerstone of any anime. Look at any success or failure in recent years, and it basically comes down to the number of cute girls pulling silly faces per second. It's at the very heart of Frieren, Dungeon, Meshi, and Witch Hat, I tell you. Although I guess if I really delve and you think about it, there might be a couple of other factors at work too, I guess. So you really want to overanalyze. Anyway, it isn't the fantasy label that makes these animes special. It's something else. Each of them goes off in their own direction, but they all have one thing in common. Bizarrely, all three of them feature the dragon fight as one of their most impactful early set pieces. Frieren specifically has a few cool dragon fights, but that's one of the places where we can see what's made each of the three so special. Their approaches to action, or inaction in some. Frieren has the most prominent battle stuff. Its magic system is well designed for large-scale fights, especially of how much more space the anime gives them. It might be the best place to start with how the three take the base idea of a fantasy serious and break out into new territory. A dragon needing to be dealt with. It's The Hobbit, isn't it? It's one of the foundational texts of the modern fantasy genre. An origin point. So if we're looking at these three different branches of where fantasy anime can go in 2026, that's the perfect starting point. Frieren's dragon fight is to establish a character. It does have all this, yeah, that's in there, that's all in there. But there's all this characterization around it. Stark talks to Fern, to Frieren, we see him in an intimate moment, we get a sense of him. We meet the character in the moonlight and learn something new about both of them. The overnight scene of a connection being made is more important than the dragon scene. The fight itself, that's the payoff. It's quick and it solidifies a character. It works as the end point to these conversations. Stark can easily defeat the dragon, but his mental game needed working on first, which isn't untypical for Frieren either. It's often more of a character problem driving the action than a physical one. It's just a little fight, but one that's more traditional as a battle, and the animators go kind of ham on it, which is somewhere that Frieren excels. Whereas in Dungeon Meshi, it's planning and then improvisation. This system they have to take down the Goliath is much more prep heavy than any of Frieren's dragon fights. More on par with the status they give a duplicate of Frieren. Dungeon Meshi is using the dragon fight to further play around with the dungeon systems, which have been so firmly established so far. It takes the dragon extremely seriously as a threat. It has these grounded, realistic takes on the damage a fantasy creature at this scale would cause. The world is the focus, the dungeon, the ecosystem, It works as a payoff to all that world building that happened in the many episodes before, and it culminates in eating the dragon physically. Like the Frieren fight, it's emblematic of the way Delicious in Dungeon builds off of fantasy. It starts with a core fantasy idea or trope and takes it extremely seriously. Then there's Witch Hat, which uses its very well fleshed out magic system to deal with its dragon in multiple ways. There's little girl's little plan to give the dragon a cushion and a nap. Genius. None of these other two parties thought of that. Lull it to sleep. These two go straight to blast 'em, whack 'em, and evil forbidden magic. But Witch Hat does also have this incredible key-free solution to the dragon. The whole technical way they come up with their plan isn't that fantastical. It's a functional application of the magic system, an exercise in problem solving using the rules and logic already laid out. But there is plenty of cute, silly faces in all three too. Even if, out of all three of these shows, after killing a dragon, one has the mage having a nice relaxing time with their friends, and the other, they celebrate some unholy black magic, breaking the laws of nature kind of stuff. Real dark, unsettling stuff. She wakes up a few hours early. Frieren uses the dragon fight for a fantastic action sequence. There's some action in nearly every episode in one way or another, but ultimately it's about character. Then Delicious in Dungeon is building off of its world building, and Witch Hat is using the trappings of fantasy for something quite different. This is a microcosm, a little representation of how they take anime in such different directions from the common starting point of modern fantasy. A dragon fight. But it applies to loads of different aspects of these series, starting with their approach to the world. The biggest part of Dungeon Meshi for me is the world building. It's a dungeon. The setting isn't that crazy, you know. We see dungeons in Frieren too. They even have these little cartoon shopping centre style maps that you can everything marked up and easy to find. But in Dungeon Meshi, it's alive. There's a level of detail that's fascinating. It feels like you can pull the dungeon out as like a standalone thing and it would continue to function. These little guys would just go about their business doing their skeleton things. It's all so well thought out. You go through Dungeon Meshi and it feels like you could step right in. You can imagine other fantasy casts in the dungeon. Frieren's party trying to go through would go pretty predictably. Coco maybe is like a school trip kind of thing to the upper levels. They look at the slime, go to the gift shop, get a keyring, Brush Buddy becomes the lord of the dungeon and ascends to godhood. That's what I reckon both parties would do. The dungeons and monsters are a staple, something a lot of other fantasy anime has, especially those that similarly pull from RPGs. It's present in a ton of isekai and formulaic fantasy, but that's not a bad thing. Dungeon Meshi takes a common trope and zooms so far in to make the whole ecosystem feel real. This is something we see Frieren do too. Take one aspect and blow it up so it's huge. This is a dungeon show. It's a glutton show. It's a bunch of gluttons going from buffet to buffet and just eating and eating and eating. It's like a whole party of ferns. But I think the really in-depth world building in Dungeon Meshi often hides how well written the characters are. The creatures are well thought out, yeah, they feel breathing, but every member of the party is a compelling addition. This series takes a different approach to fantasy than the others I'm going to talk about. The core system at the heart of the show is about ecology. It uses that to explore the characters in much the same way the other two series use their magic systems. Delicious in Dungeon, at its heart, is an emotional story about loss and human desires, whether that's unending desire to eat new and weird things, or more esoteric spiritual desires and raw human needs. It's very relatable and universal emotions being explored through these themes, stuff that attaches well to a fantasy world. Delicious in Dungeon uses a system to do that. In this case, it's an ecosystem and diversity in animal life. It starts with a fantasy trope, but then takes it incredibly seriously. What if you did have to eat them? Eat the monsters. Often this series is praised for its darker turns, but how much it holds together as a single piece is impressive. Witch Hat still feels more open in where it'll go than the others did at the same point in their series. Frieren is very open too. Their journey has an end point, but it's taking an awful long time with the diversions. Dungeon Meshi feels concise from the very start, but it does have that character element in common though. That's where Frieren really excels. It can feel real. Frieren takes one aspect of the prototypical fantasy setup and zooms in on it. It's the same as what Dungeon Meshi does, but a different concept. A lot of fantasy has these different races, dwarves, elves, humans, you know, but very few apply the reality of what existence would be like for an elf to this extent. So the main conceit of Frieren is one that can absolutely only work in fantasy. It's taking an elf, a fantasy creature, and just kind of asking, what would it be like to live that long? It's pretty much the premise. And the idea feeds into the whole post-game Demon King is dead. After the adventure setting, we explore loss through what it means to live so long. It takes a fantasy trope, an idea, and uses it to delve into character. This is something I typically find lacking in fantasy. The curiosity to really use the genre's details to explore the bigger ideas. How often do you watch fantasy and the dwarf's main character trait is that they're a dwarf? Or an elf is just that they're an elf. Frieren doesn't do that. It takes the experiences of one of these fantasy archetypes and delves into what that actually would mean. Waiting, losing wave after wave of people, just a time, fear. The desire for a legacy made all the worse as you're surrounded by those who will outlive you. The desire for your loved ones to flourish even after you're gone. Frieren's characters and their struggles are drawn from universal experiences, but it uses fantasy archetypes as the starting point. The elves aren't all depicted as wise, know-it-alls, spiritually close to the afterlife or something mystical. Frieren actually deconstructs a ton of the fantasy tropes about this. It's similar to what Dungeon Meshi does with the monsters. The elves are childish. They're prone to ridiculous self-indulgence. In a lot of ways, they have moody teenage periods extended over centuries. They're in no rush to grow up, and in a lot of cases, don't ever. The dwarf isn't some gung-ho weapons smelter either. He's a warrior, but a fearful one. An example of, exploring what it would actually be like to live up to those ideals. Senshi is close in some ways with that, taking a more traditional character aspect and exploring it through subversion. But Frieren goes all in on exploring this aspect. It takes the fantasy starting point and goes off in its own direction. Tons of the more formulaic fantasy use elves and dwarves, but they don't tend to be this interested in that as a tool for looking at the human condition. They're just set dressing in most stuff. In Frieren, it's more than just a token inclusion of elves and dwarves. It's actually interested in what it means to live that way. It's not just them, there's demons, priests, literal angels, couple of them in there too. It's a fantasy trope that's widely used, but explored in such greater depth in Frieren. It's the same method as Dungeon Meshi's world building. They take a key component of fantasy to its logical extreme, eat it up, and raise the bar for the genre in anime beyond what most series bother with. Frieren's characters are absolutely its strongest point to me. Something that's unique to it though, is using an elf's time span to make character development so much more visible. We get to jump around from birth to middle age, from one age to another, sometimes to tell stories over thousands of years. It takes one element that's the background of fantasy and makes it the key to its storytelling, frequently getting whole lives in one slice. With Dungeon Meshi, that's the ecosystem. But with Frieren, it's the fantasy archetypes' different ways of experiencing life. They both start here and end in completely different places. But then we've got a third, which in a lot of ways is a completely different thing, despite how much it has in common with Frieren and Dungeon Meshi. But it kind of also takes one aspect and follows it to its end point. Which, I had to tell you, has very well-written characters too, and the world building is fascinating so far, but beyond maybe the aesthetic of a fantasy world, it's pretty much a completely different genre to these two. It shows that it isn't really fantasy that's made these anime special. Fantasy is the starting point, but often they subvert and break more common rules to do something completely fresh. Witch Hat is set in a world with magic, but it's not as high fantasy as the others. Where Dungeon Meshi and Frieren take elements of the genre and veer off in completely different directions, Witch Hat is kind of its own thing entirely. In common with these two, it has techniques, qualities, traits, but not really like a defining element. So like Dungeon Meshi, it takes this system level approach to a part of its world, and in this case, that's the magic system. It's incredibly fleshed out. It doesn't feel like the same thing we see in more formulaic fantasy. Maybe this counts as taking a fantasy element and zooming all the way in and subverting it, but Witch Hat's magic is its own thing. As many people have brought up in a video where I got it very wrong, it's got elements of coding to it, this whole metaphorical aspect, there's a lot there. This series also takes a character-first approach to things like Frieren does, and it has this dark turn where you actually start to dwell on what the implications of what the world's settings mean. Each of these three has something going on, with death as the core idea. Maybe the obsession with death and transformation is the biggest linking thread, other than the dragon fight that I talked about in the beginning, I guess. When all three series had a pivotal dragon fight early on. That was kind of similar now that I think about it. But as a setting, it doesn't have the dungeons, monsters, or any of that stuff like in Dungeon Meshi. This isn't a world that's pulled directly from RPGs, no hallmark races of fantasy, no elves, no big battles like Frieren. These are three fantastic anime that share quite a bit of DNA in their source, but I think there's a lot more series which have just as much in common with these three, that just don't have the fantasy label applied to them. The connecting factor is quality, it's writing, it's the massive care taken in adaptation to make it all it can be. It's an author who seems to pull things out from the ether fully formed in their detail. Pretty much the thing these three all have in common is that they're fucking good. And cute girls doing silly faces, of course, all three have got tons of that, so never mind the big three of fantasy. These are the big four of cute girls doing silly faces with great writing, and sometimes they have a dragon fight, but this one doesn't, and that's fine, it still fits. This is the big four. Hey, I've been completely learned. Thanks for sitting through this or zoning out. We're on in the background, so if you want to see similar stuff. Alright, cheers.